And joining us today for the pundits is Bill Spence from the Lewiston Tribune, Dr. Jacqueline Kettler from Boise State University, Heath Drusen from Boise State Public Radio, and Betsy Russell from the Idaho Press. Bill, I wanted to start with you, that Friday morning hearing, the continuation on the voter initiative testimony. Bill was ultimately held in committee, but we're going to hear about it again next week, right? The committee's going to bring it up for a vote?
Yes. This wasn't a typical let's hold it in committee because we want to kill it maneuver. Both the majority leader, the committee chairwoman, other members were very clear this is coming back, possibly as early as next week. We are going to vote on it before sine die. Senator Winder also mentioned that, yes, we'll be talking with our Republican caucus before that vote. So I kind of interpret that as let's make sure we're all on board with this because the public is obviously very upset about it. Let's make sure that we as a caucus know how we want to move forward on it.
Let's talk about that tension. You sat through the hearing, and what was the mood in the room like?
It was among the angriest hearings that I've been to in 11 years. It started out unusually with Senator Hill commenting on a rally that took place the day before, which he interpreted as that there was some disrespect at the rally to the sponsor of the bill, Senator Groh. And he was clearly upset about that. And then you had members of the public who were clearly upset at the bill and took that as an insult to them and to the public of Idaho. So.
And that's interesting, Betsy, because normally when I'm at an angry hearing, it's the public that's angry at the lawmakers. I rarely see lawmakers like we saw today who are angry at those who are testifying right back.
Yeah, we had it going both ways. And the chairman had really a big job to make this a civil and productive hearing. And even though she started off a little rockily on Monday toward that end, I thought by the end of the hearing she really had a good grasp on that. I thought the testimony was absolutely fascinating. By my count, 55 people testified. All but 2 were 100% against this bill for a wide variety of reasons, many drawing on their own personal experiences, either going out and collecting signatures for Proposition 2 or other experiences they've had in their life living in Idaho. Many people talked about how they were Republicans and they thought this was an un-Republican thing to do. There was a lot of mention about how the legislature, every time a citizen initiative or referendum has actually passed in Idaho, which is rare, the legislature goes in and tries to make it harder to get one on the ballot. And that is, in fact, what has happened.
Dr. Kettler, we heard throughout testimony this idea of whether we're a democracy or a representative republic and what role people have in our government. Where's that balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? Not all states have a ballot initiative like this where you can actually, have voters propose and vote on legislation directly. But it's a great way to kind of allow citizens direct engagement in policy making. And the research has kind of debated the effects of it, but it seems to bring more attention to state elections, maybe help increase voter knowledge about state elections, which is great in a time where there's a lot of focus on national politics and not necessarily on state politics.
We also had a little bit of a history lesson, I thought, from some of the testimony today about some of the things that have been accomplished in Idaho over the years through the voter initiative and referendum. Things like the homeowners exemption, the Sunshine Law, the creation of the Idaho Fish and Game Commission. Those all happened through initiative.
Jackie, I'm curious whether you know, obviously some states have an easier process of getting initiatives on the ballot, but do legislatures typically react? Are they skeptical and somewhat resistant to this power that the people reserve to themselves?
I think often legislators are a little cautious about, ballot initiatives because sometimes unconstitutional things could be proposed that way, things that may not be funded, or they can create issues sometimes. But they're also great ways to kind of address policy needs or issues that maybe the majority hasn't worked on in office. And it is, and Idaho is comparatively pretty tough already to get a ballot measure on the ballot, and so it's not especially easy compared to some states like California that have a lot more ballot initiatives.
And that's, of course, not the only way that Idahoans can participate in government. There's also, as we saw all this week, the public testimony process at the legislature. But already the House Republican caucus has come out in support of this bill without even hearing testimony. It hasn't come out of the Senate committee yet. So in your experience, how much does the testimony process actually make a difference in lawmaking?
It's a great question, and it's one that I think is, we definitely are curious about. It's hard to know. I think often individual stories can sometimes be pretty impactful for an individual legislator. Legislators will talk like, wow, I hadn't really considered that. But especially if the party caucus is already kind of in favor before it's proposed, testimony may not make a huge impact. It kind of varies by the legislator, I think.
But I also think one of the, to me, standout things about this session is even though legislators may acknowledge privately that public testimony typically doesn't sway their vote, they're usually not so in your face about it. I've never seen a House caucus or Senate caucus come out before they have even received the bill and say, we're in favor of this, and basically thumb their nose at the public and say, we don't even need to listen to your comments. We don't need to give you the courtesy of a public hearing before making our minds up. To me, that's an extraordinary statement to make.
I wanted to bring Heath in on the discussion. Of course, the voter initiative process isn't the only place where we've seen tension in the legislature this week. There were also 2 pieces of gun legislation that were debated on the House floor, and you covered both of those bills.
Yeah, and it was a spirited debate for both. One of them was to lower the age, the legal age to carry a concealed weapon within city limits, and that was from 21 to 18. That ended up passing rather easily.
On party lines, right?
Yes. It passed. It passed rather easily along party lines. Although there was very spirited debate about it. We even got into. I wouldn't say a shouting match, but we were getting right to that limit. Yeah, no one was gavelled down, but there were kind of yellow cards issued to both sides in a way, yeah, we got deep into to brain science in that debate. It was a pretty detailed, pretty emotional debate, but on the other side there was the bill to what Democrats said was closing a loophole, but certainly some Republicans didn't think of it that way. Basically restricting gun rights for sex offenders who are convicted of sexual battery of a 16 and 17-year-old. And that sounds very specific because it is. The law already prevents people convicted of sexual battery of minors under 16 from having firearms unless they petition to get them back.
And not just after or not just during their sentence and probation, but after their sentence has been complete, right?
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. They have to petition to get their firearms rights back.
Got it.
Heath, I'm curious what you thought of the debate on that bill.
The debate definitely veered into the bizarre at some points. I think part of the problem that some of the supporters had was that part of the debate seemed to be going to problems with the statute itself, the sexual battery statute, whereas the bill was actually about your civil rights after you're released. And then there was a comment that's been getting a lot of notice from Judy Boyle, basically saying that she talked about teenage girls and how they dressed, which certainly I think for a lot of people, brings up
It came across as victim blaming.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it came across as victim blaming and a very sort of potentially damaging thing to say to young girls, especially in the context of sexual battery.
And there was also Representative Cheney who stood up. He supported the bill, and he said, we're talking about people who have committed sexual abuse against minors.
Yeah, to me it kind of adds to the whole atmosphere of people are kind of feeling some tension. I mean, he was almost at the edge of outrage. You know, let's be clear. What we are talking about is whether we should restore gun rights to convicted child molesters. And he came right out and said, you know, if somebody were to do this to my daughter, they better have a gun because I'm coming after them. And you typically don't hear language of that sort on the House or Senate floor.
And this bill ultimately passed, but the majority of Republicans did vote against it. It needed both Democratic and Republican support to pass. But the House Republican caucus came out with a statement after that debate, trying to walk a fine line, Betsy, about their support for protecting children, but also gun rights.
These press releases saying this is what the House Republican caucus believes are a new thing in my experience. The new House Republican caucus chair, Representative Megan Blanksma, has said going into the job she wanted to be more communicative, but essentially what she's been doing is issuing what come across as almost edicts from this monolithic thing. The House Republican caucus says X, Y, and Z, that's what they believe. That's not really how most people look at it. It's the vast majority of the members of the House. It includes representatives from very different districts and backgrounds, and it's not usually quite that monolithic.
You know, that said, though, I will say communication from the House Republican caucus has been better than it has been in recent years, and not all the press releases are controversial. Some of them are pretty straightforward, right? Like
Sure.
We're focusing on these two kind of controversial ones, but for the most part, they're pretty like mundane. This is where we are.
Communication in general, I believe, is a good thing. In fact, it is Sunshine Week when we celebrate openness in government.
That's right. You know, I wanted to ask you, has this session been more tense and more angry than past ones?
I certainly feel like the blatancy of some of the comments made about, you know, from committee chairmen, the dismissive that they expressed towards fairly large turnouts on controversial bills. I haven't seen it to the degree I've seen it this year. I mean, there's always tension when we get down towards the end of the session and they're under a time crunch, and every now and then, you know, they have to cut hearings short. But this year, the way they have cut those hearings short, earlier this week on the initiative bill, Senator Lodge saying everybody else is against the bill. So essentially kind of suggesting, why would we have to listen to you guys? You're all against it. Senator Hyder on a controversial federal lands bill saying, we got 150 people signed up. Well, we'll hear from 3 or 4 of you. Just the tone that has been taken this year has been very striking to me.
You know, Dr. Kettler, I'm wondering, as I'm noticing as a reporter, that it seems a little bit more tense. Do you think the national dialogue is contributing to the tension in the State House, or are these two siloed conversations?
I think there can be kind of a bleed over effect in that we see national politics increasingly impacting state politics. People vote in state elections on the basis of presidential popularity. People think about like the national party platforms, not just state platforms, right? And so I think, and there is that tension in national politics. Things are tense and there's not necessarily a lot of respect going across the party aisle, but also with citizens and things. So I think that we could be seeing kind of that kind of trickling down, but I mean, some of it may also be kind of state tensions as well.
Heath, I wanted to bring the conversation back to you a little bit. As we're talking about tension, you've noticed a different kind of tension in the State House with the presence of 3% members. And we have a little less than 2 minutes left. But can you talk about how these folks' presence in the State House might be adding to those tensions?
Yeah, sure. You know, they're very visible, 3%ers. They're a group that's very skeptical of the government. A lot of people see them as a militia, although they would say they're not. They often walk around the Capitol armed, and they've been peaceful. They say they are peaceful. They say there's nothing to worry about. There are some folks, obviously I'm covering all sides of the gun debate, so I'm also talking to folks in groups like Moms Demand who are asking for gun control. And some of them do say they feel intimidated by the presence of armed men. And also they say sometimes folks, will kind of block their way and kind of say, what are you doing? And there's no specific threats, but yeah, there's some folks who are uncomfortable with armed people walking around and getting debates.
Well, because I'll say the 3% members that I've met have been very polite to me, but as you said,
to me as well, yeah,
right,
sure.
Absolutely, but there is something to be said for if you're talking to somebody who is armed, that adds a different kind of tension for some people.
Sure, and obviously, there's different mindsets in different parts of the state, and maybe somebody who's grown up in Boise might have a different relationship to guns than someone who grew up in rural Idaho.
Sure, and you have continuing coverage on this coming out?
Yes, that'll be coming out soon.
All right, that's all the time we have. Heath Drusen, Betsy Russell, Bill Spence, and Dr. Jackie Kettler, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for watching. We have a live story for an event. Our information is on our website, and we'll see you right back here next week.